Okay, what we have here is a screenshot from a website that says if the Sabbath is not regulated by the moon, here's a list of scriptures that you need to ignore. So if you're wondering why some of these points are worded the way that they are, keep in mind that that's the way that the page is titled at the top. I'm not going to go through everything on this page. And, the reason I want to focus on these 4 things right here is because this was the biggest thing that gave me difficulty in, I almost actually thought this doctrine was true, and the main reason was because of these 4 points right here. So if you're not familiar with the lunar Sabbath, I'm just going to give you a quick summary of what it is. I mean, basically, there's a lot of information out there on the internet about it, but we are on what's considered a repeating 7-day-a-week cycle. So basically, and I'll just give you an easy example, to understand with the Gregorian. The Gregorian calendar is the calendar that has January, February, March, April. Okay, it's the calendar that we typically use. So on the Gregorian calendar, say if April 30th falls on Tuesday, when you go to May 1st, which is the next day, even though the month begins over, and even though the week even though the days of the month begin over, the week still stays the same. So if April 30th was Tuesday, the May 1st is Wednesday. That's what you call a continual 7-day-a-week cycle. And it doesn't matter if you're on the Hebrew calendar or the Gregorian calendar, it works the same way. When you go into a new month or when you go into a new year, the 7-day repeating cycle continues on. That is contrary to what the lunar Sabbath doctrine teaches. The lunar Sabbath doctrine teaches that at the beginning of every month, when you see the sliver of the first new moon, or the first sliver of the new moon, that is new moon day. And then after new moon day, you work 6 days, which brings you to the 7th day of the month. And then your day after that, which is 7 days from new moon day, is the 8th, and that's your first Sabbath of the month. And so all your Sabbaths always fall on 8, 15, 22nd, and 29th of the month. And that's about as deep in the summary as I'm going to go. So what I wanted to point out is also, with the exception of the Feast of Trumpets, which falls, it's the first day of the 7th month, which would fall on New Moon Day, and except for Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, which falls on the 10th day of the 7th month, all the other feast days, according to the Lunar Sabbatarian, will fall on a weekly Sabbath. And that's one of the reasons why the month is regulated by the moon, according to the Lunar Sabbatarian doctrine, is so that all the feast days can fall on the weekly Sabbaths. So one of the things that I noticed, before we get into these points real quick, one of the first things that I noticed before I when I was looking at that, I thought, oh, well, if that's consistent, that's pretty interesting. But one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is, go to Leviticus chapter 23 and read about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It specifically says that on the 15th day of the month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's the first day. That's the Holy Convocation. And for 7 days you eat unleavened bread. Okay? And on the 7th day of that feast, you will have another Holy Convocation. So if your first day is starting on a Sabbath, which is day number 1, and 6 days later you have another Holy Convocation, guess what? That falls on the 6th day of the week. It doesn't fall on the next Sabbath. And if you want to even drive that home even further, go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 18, and you'll actually see it specifically says in the text that the second Holy Convocation of unleavened bread is in fact on the 21st day of the month. So if the lunar Sabbath doctrine is the 22nd, it says it's 8, 15, 22, and 29, then the second day of unleavened bread does not fall on the 22nd like it's supposed to. And like I said, in Leviticus 23, it specifically says in the 7th day. So the first day, the 7th day. Okay, so that was the first thing that kind of made me realize this wasn't completely as accurate as these lunar Sabbatarians say that it is. But anyway, so now we're going to get into these points. Number 3 says, ignore that the Exodus was on the Sabbath, the 15th of Aviv. Okay, this is in reference to the Exodus. They quote scripture here, Numbers 33:3, Deuteronomy. I'm not arguing that. That is true. Okay? But I'm going to get into that in a second. Number 4, please disregard as a coincidence that the 8th day of the same month is also a set time or moed in Hebrew. Okay, now in Exodus 9:5, I'm not going to argue that it says that Yahuwah declared an appointed time or a set time for the next day. Okay, let me actually see. I remember how it worked. It says, and Yahuwah appointed a set time, saying, tomorrow Yahuwah shall do this in the land, this thing in the land. And he goes on to explain about the 5th plague. So I don't really know how they deduce that. I'm guessing they're thinking that the 5th plague is on the 1st day of the week, the 6th plague is on the 2nd, the 7th plague is on the 3rd, the 8th plague is on the 4th, the 9th plague is on the 5th day of the week, and then the 10th plague on the 6th day of the week, which would have been Passover, and then the Exodus on the next day, which would have been Shabbat. That's the only thing I can conclude. But when you look in the, like for instance, when you read the 7th plague, it says that Yahuwah spoke unto Moses, told him, rise up early in the morning and then go to Pharaoh and tell him tomorrow there will be a plague of hail that will come. So right there we don't see that these are actual consecutive days. And then when you get into the 9th plague of darkness, the plague of darkness lasted for 3 days. So I really don't know what they're trying to deduce there from Exodus 9:5 in saying that it was a Shabbat, because when you actually read in the text, there's no reason to believe that it was a Shabbat. I mean, it doesn't say that. I mean, they're implying that. They're reading that into the text. Point number 5 here says, ignore that the 15th day of the 2nd month was also a Sabbath. Exodus 16:1. Manna fell for 6 days after the 15th. They gathered twice as much on the 6th day, which was the 21st day of the month. 15 plus 16 equals 21, because the following day was a Sabbath. If the 22nd was a Sabbath, so was the 15th. I'm not going to argue anything with that point. That is 100% true. Okay? But before I say anything more about that, I want to read the next thing. It says, disregard the fact that on the 15th day of the 3rd month, Israel departed from Rephidim, which means rest. Exodus 19:2. Inferring that the 15th day of the month for 3 consecutive months has been a weekly Sabbath, which cannot happen with the pagan papal Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian can produce a weekly Sabbath for 2 consecutive months if a February of a non-leap year is the 1st month, and assuming that the 15th of February just happens to be on a Saturday. February did not even exist 4,000 years ago. I won't argue with that. That's true as well. The Gregorian calendar, that's the only way it could actually do that is on the, if you had a 28-day month. The Hebrew calendar, though, has no 28-day months, and all the days are at least 29. So right off the bat, that 6th point is what really got me. Because it's like, with the Hebrew calendar, the minimum amount of days you have in a month is 29. So it almost seems that, okay, maybe the Sabbaths are regulated by the moons, because it does seem on the surface from what they're showing here that the 15th day of the first 3 months was in fact a Sabbath. And there's no way that could happen on a 29-day or 30-day calendar. Unless, with a continual 7-day-a-week repeating cycle that continues from, month to month. So this kind of stumped me a little bit, and I was like, wow, I wonder what's going on here. So I actually had to do a little bit of reading into the text and digging. And now I want to address the second issue here, which is number 5. It says ignore that the 15th day of the 2nd month was also the Sabbath. This point right here is the whole key. When you read in Exodus 16:1, it was in fact a Sabbath day. That was the day the children of Israel cried out, and then Yahuwah told Moses, he said, tell the children of Israel that beginning tomorrow, manna will fall from heaven, and it will fall for 6 days, and you collect twice as much on the 6th day. I'm going to do this to test them. And on the 7th day will be a Sabbath of rest. I want you to look, though, at the text. I want you to look. Go all the way back to the Exodus. Go all the way back from when they came out of Egypt. Okay, go all the way back to the plagues. You won't find the Sabbath spoken about before this point. You know why? Because in Exodus chapter 16, this is actually when the Sabbath was actually reinstituted. Don't get me wrong, it was given at creation. But it was reinstituted right here at Exodus chapter 16. So you know what that means? That means point number 3 on this list is invalid. Because here's the thing. Yes, the 15th day of the month is a high Sabbath. It's the first day of unleavened bread. But it wasn't when Israel went out of Egypt. Otherwise, they would have been breaking it, if you think about it, because they were traveling. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't a high Sabbath, though, because it had not been reinstituted yet. They haven't been given all the commandments for this, for the feast days and so on and so forth yet. So when we get to Exodus chapter 16, this is when the Sabbath is finally reinstituted. Okay? So basically the idea that Sabbath was on the 15th in the first month and Sabbath was on the 16th or the 15th in the second month, and that means that the that it has to have been, the calendar has to have been regulated by the moon, is false. Because like I said, the 15th day of the first month, yes, it is a high Sabbath. If you go with the continual 7-day repeating cycle, there's no reason to believe that it falls on a weekly Sabbath, though. So, and that's what I'm trying to say, is they're trying to imply that it does in fact fall on a weekly Sabbath, but there's no reason to believe that. Now, the last point here is what we have to address. When you get into Exodus chapter 19, okay, and here's the whole point of this is probably the hardest to understand point, because basically it says, in the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. Notice it does not say on the 15th day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Okay? And when you look into it, this one I actually had to do a little bit of research on. When you look into it, there's 3 trains of thought pertaining to this verse. I'm not talking about from a lunar Sabbatarian perspective. I'm just talking about from a rabbinic perspective. Okay? A rabbinic and an early church father perspective, we'll say. There's 3 schools of thought. Number 1 is the most preposterous, okay? And that is that it is the 15th day of the month. That it's saying that the same day they came out of Egypt, which was the 15th, that they came into the land of the wilderness of Sinai. The reason I say that this is preposterous is because if you actually look on the calendar and do the math yourself, pretty much everybody agrees that Pentecost or Shavuot falls on Sivan 6th or Sivan 7, which is the third month, on the 6th day or the 7th day of the third month. So if they came into the wilderness of Sinai in the third month, then please explain to me, and that's the 15th day, they've already missed Shavuot by 9 days. They're already 9 days ahead of it. And then when you actually read on in the text through chapter 19, you'll see that that Moses goes up on the mount. The Lord descends upon the mount. He tells Moses, go down and tell the children of Israel to sanctify themselves today, tomorrow, and be ready against the third day. So if they were already 9 days ahead, if it was the 15th and they were already 9 days past Shavuot, then now they're 12 days. You see what I'm saying? So that's the most ridiculous idea that there is. Okay, basically the second school of thought, I went ahead and devised a just a blank, crude blank calendar here for 1, 2, 3 months. Obviously, this is going to represent the first month when Israel came out of Egypt. This will be the second month and third month. Well, I haven't put any days on it yet because I want you to see what I'm doing. Because you see, the second school of thought, it basically says that in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, in the third month, when the children of Israel were gone out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. And basically, the second school of thought says that, since it says in the third month, and it says on the same day, that it's talking about the same day as it is the month. So it's basically the third day of the third month, which this is much more probable than the 15th day of the third month, which would have us way past Shavuot, and that's why I drew this, so we can see that. We can actually illustrate that. The last school of thought is that the same day is a reference to the first day of the month. But after we finish drawing this, you'll see why that's probably not the case.